Welcome, boys and girls. Costin here with a discussion about the Tomb Kings in Lords of the End Times, and of course, a discussion about Nagash and Settra. The final confrontation between Settra and Nagash did play an important role in the End Times, as Nagash did invade Nehekhara, took back his Black Pyramid, and essentially took over the power of the Tomb King god of the underworld, which made him significantly more powerful and capable of trying to enact his ritual to take over chaos, which was stopped by the Skaven and the forces of Nurgle in the end times. And Nagash does have a role to play with how Tomb Kings handle their campaigns in Warhammer 3. First off, we do have to talk about the Black Pyramid in itself. What's going to happen to it in Lords and End Times? Is Nagash just going to take it over? Is it going to be something that he's going to be able to move around the campaign world, which, yeah, he was able to do in the End Times? The Nagash mod attaches it to his army, though I'm not quite sure the idea of having Nagash with a horde army is the best thing in the world. Maybe it's something you can move, but it becomes a settlement. That would certainly be an interesting mechanic. And of course, with the Black Pyramid of Nagash, you do have the landmark. You do also have the victory conditions, the current victory conditions for the Tomb Kings, because it does require you to hold the Black Pyramid of Nagash and, yeah, just build it up, hold it, take control of it from the Sentinels. On top of that, there's also the Tomb King endgame crisis as it currently is, where a bunch of armies spawn around the Black Pyramid of Nagash. So if Nagash is going to take over the Black Pyramid, then I imagine that should be changed. Maybe the entire point of the Nagash endgame crisis, or the undead endgame crisis, as Creative Assembly is working on it, and Lords of the End Times, will have to do with all of the undead factions. I mean, it would make sense, right? So Vampire Counts, Vampire Coast, and the Tomb Kings themselves. There's, of course, also the question of how you would be able to stop Nagash, especially if Creative Assembly is going to start him out in Nagash's R, which I'm guessing that's what they're intending to do. Then I certainly hope they're going to change the geography of this area, or at least how you traverse this specific area of the campaign map. I mean, one of the easier solutions Creative Assembly could do with Nagash's is just basically start him at war with the Skaven, and, you know, you start with the main settlement, and you have to capture the province, and then you invade the Black Pyramid, you invade Nehekhara, and you have that confrontation with Settra. That's what the mod does, by the way. It does push you towards that specific confrontation. On top of that, we also should talk about the books of Nagash. It would not make sense for Nagash to not have his books in his campaign. And the entire system of the books of Nagash is just not an ideal one in any way, shape, or form. First off, you can't just take them with diplomacy. Secondly, the distance between you and those books can be rather annoying, like having to go all the way to Sylvania to get the Book of Nagash is not ideal. And then we also should talk about the randomization factor that exists with these books. So the effects that you can gain from these books is randomized. There's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of things that Creative Assembly could do with these books, but right now they're quite important in terms of the effects that they give to the Tomb Kings, especially when you're thinking about like the 5th book of Nagash, because one army capacity and unit capacity for Tomb Guards is rather significant. And then, of course, there's the 1st book of Nagash, which gives you hero capacity +1 to all heroes if you're playing the Tomb King. So Nagash is going to impact the Tomb Kings in a substantial way, unless Creative Assembly decides to do something that I think would be rather questionable, which is to say that, yeah, Nagash is back, he has his books if you play him, but if you're playing the Tomb Kings, you still have to deal with the same mechanics. I don't believe that's how a campaign as the Tomb Kings should work out. I think that Tomb Kings in particular, given their history with Nagash, should be on the warpath against him, and especially with regards to Settra. Like Arkhan did bring back Nagash in End Times, so his campaign definitely should be changed, maybe a different starting position, maybe different campaign objectives. Khalida ended up joining Nagash, which, yeah, I know, End Times has very, very difficult to accept lore in some ways, especially because, Khalida hates the vampire, so she should not be too fond of Nagash. And Katep was killed by Settra, executed by Settra, because Katep was exiled from the cities of Nehekara. Not from Nehekara itself as a whole, but from the cities of Nehekara. And Katep's always been the weird one out in terms of Tomb King campaigns, especially with regards to victory conditions, because his campaign as is based around the idea of him coming back to Nehekara and being forced to fight Settra. So yeah, it's just a really weird campaign dynamic that Tomb Kings do currently have. And a lot of it, again, is tied to the influence that Nagash has, even though he is currently not in the game. So it was built around the idea of like the influence that Nagash has left behind with regards to Tomb Kings. But now that he's coming back, then, well, I think there are some substantial changes that Creative Assembly needs to make with regards to the Tomb Kings. Furthermore, we should also talk about unique campaign mechanics for the legendary lords of the Tomb Kings, because when you look at them, yes, they do have unique skills, and yes, Arkhan does have that unique book that gives him some units, but those are not really unique campaign mechanics. Settra does have the benefit of growth and construction time for all buildings, Khalida has some range benefits, Katep is Katep. I mean, to be honest, he does have some mortuary cult benefits, but those are not unique campaign mechanics, and certainly Settra, at least, should be someone that's unique. And then, beyond just like having unique mechanics, we also have to talk about Settra's journey in the End Times, because he did lose against Nagash. Then the Chaos Gods brought him back, and then he kind of found his way to Middenheim for the final battle, where he decided that he hated the idea of the Chaos Gods forcing him to serve so much that he was basically like, I am going to fight alongside you before these guys are defeated, and then we'll have our own little showdown. That was, in essence, Settra's campaign, if you will, in the End Times, and I do believe to some degree that should be reflected. Maybe his campaign initially is focused on the idea of stopping Nagash, or if Creative Assembly is going to bring back Nagash at kind of full power, then his campaign is trying to prevent him from taking over the world. Which does mean that the way he handles the campaign, traverses things around the campaign map, does definitely need to play out different, especially if Nagash's endgame crisis is about him uniting the undead factions and forcing them under his banner. Then Settra should be trying to stop that from happening, because Settra does not serve. Then you have the usual things to talk about with regards to legendary lords and generic lords and heroes, which is, skill lines could be changed and improved. I mean, Settra, the Tomb Kings in general do have okay-ish skill lines, but definitely something that could be talked about and improved as well with regards to them. You at least do have unique skill lines for the heroes of the Tomb Kings, though. I gotta say, the entire idea that the Tomb Kings have vampiric corruption is a bit weird, and then the Dead Rise Again mechanic doesn't quite work out so well for them in a campaign. For what it's worth, they are the best, at least from a military standpoint, they are the best undead faction. I mean, they don't have the best lords and heroes, that goes for the vampire counts, but in terms of having an army that actually gets the job done, they do have that. Sure, they don't have the best melee units, but they more than make up for that with Shopti, really. Surprising how a bunch of monstrous infantry ranged capability, as well as artillery, like Screaming Skull catapults and Caskets of Souls, can really help them out. One of the things to be talked about, though, with regards to the Casket of Souls is like, yeah, the cooldown has been improved, but still limited. It's a shame that it is a limited unit. Maybe the more you do that ritual, the more slots you get for Casket of Souls, and you can just recruit them at a cost. Maybe that should be one of the units that you recruit for money, because it is a pretty powerful unit. Then we could talk about the mortuary cult themselves. The units available over here that we're talking about, like these units, they're just not worth the resources, and certainly not worth the canopic jars that are required in a campaign in order to unlock them. The Confederation is worth it until you realize they can just beat up Khalida to get that going, and then you have hero capacity and army capacity that you can increase over here with canopic jars. I mean, you can certainly earn more canopic jars than you ever could before, but the entire system of using canopic jars for hero and army capacity is something that Creative Assembly should have done better, because right now, as things currently stand for the Tomb Kings, the dynamics of their campaigns is that you spend a decent amount of time in the early game unlocking, a second army, saving the money for that, unlocking a second army, and once you get the second army or a third army, especially with research, then you kind of don't really care whatsoever about it. You become an unstoppable horde of death destruction because your units no longer cost money, and you can just fill them up even with skeletal spearmen and warriors. Or you can actually just get a bunch of Nehekara warriors, Tomb Guard, and all kinds of, and skeletal archers, even though skeletal archers aren't the best ranged units in the world. I mean, at least they are ranged units, but hey, you do at least have that kind of capability available in your campaign, which is not something everyone can say. But it is a scaling issue where you do, or an inverted difficulty curve issue, where the early game is, it's not even a question of it being difficult. Like, Khalida might have some annoyances with Forik, absolutely. Settra might have some issues with Scarbrand early on, but once you overcome those particular issues, you're just going to be on a roll and nothing's going to be able to stop you. And that creates a situation where it's not especially fun dealing with the Tomb King campaign in the long term, because your armies are disposable. Your heroes, until you get immortality on them, your heroes are not, but you can always just globally recruit heroes. You don't have those kind of limitations. It is a design that just means that you're going to have a frustrating early game, and then the late game is just going to be a steamroller that's not going to be stopped by anything in the game, which is not how I think the game should work. How would I improve it? Well, that's a pretty damn good question. Of course, having an endgame crisis worth something in the game would go a long way towards making that situation better. Absolutely. But I think in general, just the idea that you can recruit infinite armies eventually, and you can recruit armies for free, and you don't have, and once you gain enough territory, you just populate them with a lot of elite units, or rather with a lot of Tomb Guards and maybe some artillery, is not necessarily ideal. I think the whole notion of unit caps, or unit capacity for units, is not necessarily something that has gone well so far in the game. I believe that when we're talking about unit capacity, it's always just better to have some better default of unit capacity, and how it increases and how you struggle with the end game. It's like, I would start a Tomb King campaign at a faster pace. Like this is the reason why Archon is the best legendary lord of the Tomb Kings, because he does have an extra army from the get-go, and he doesn't have to deal with those initial unit caps, so you can get the campaign going from the very beginning. Though again, he also has the same issue of that inverted difficulty curve, because even he just ends up filling his army with Tomb Guard, though he also has vampire count units, which are a bit better in his campaign because they're just designed to be a bit better, and he does have that special skill line available to him to make them better. It's a combination of the way you unlock things, so army capacity being tied to research that takes turns, hero capacity, a lot of it being tied to the research tree, and then just eventually, as you build a massive empire, you just start spamming heroes and armies, and you don't have a care in the world about it. There's only a challenge in a campaign insofar as the early game is concerned, and even then it's not necessarily as big of a challenge. On top of that, because Tomb Kings can vassalize factions through diplomacy, so you have the ability of vassalizing any other faction through diplomacy. You can just take territory and sell it to them and get vassals that don't have the same limitations on it. The sheer amount of vassals that you can gain in a campaign like this is kind of ridiculous. Though what's weird when we're thinking about the Tomb King campaign is you don't have the ability of either confederating a fellow Tomb King faction, which, yeah, I mean, sure, some of them, like Khalida and Katep if you're playing Settra, but even so, it's not ideal, especially because when you think about Settra, he was ruling over the other Tomb Kings, so he should certainly have diplomatic relations with these other factions and may be able to confederate them later down the line, instead of being in a situation, well, I need their territory, I need it to complete the campaign, and then, so I need to wipe them out. I mean, you benefit immensely from wiping them out, like taking over this entire 4-region province. Lots of growth, lots of potential over here in terms of units and even economic situation. That's, by the way, one of the reasons you want a vassalized faction. The amount of money that Tomb Kings can generate in their campaign is not that great, but you can absolutely generate a huge amount through vassals. And yeah, you're just kind of trivializing a lot of the game as it goes. And even then, the research tree in itself just kind of feels not really that great, because think of it. If you're playing a Tomb King campaign, what is your priority in terms of research? Well, the priority is going to be unlocking the various dynasties. And once you do unlock those various dynasties, it's going to be basically get the hero capacity for Lich Priests, Necrotects, and Tomb Princes. And so a lot of the benefits that you supposedly get for military units is just like not ideal. It's also not the most fun system to just basically have research that slows itself down, though that's become less of an issue. Like, it's no longer just 20%, it's a flat value, so it's not as big of a problem, I suppose, as it was before. But yeah, I think the entire research tree, the way it currently works, as well as the dynamics overall of a Tomb King campaign, are not ideal. And then we look at the actual recruitment situation of units for the Tomb Kings. Basically, you're just going to benefit a lot from getting the royal barracks and as many of them as you possibly can. You're not really going to care all that much about the royal menagerie because, well, the cavalry in itself is not especially great, and the only units that are kind of okay are like Necropolis Knights and Sepulchral Stalkers, but that's really with a tier 4 one. And with Skull Repository, yeah, chariots, I think like Tomb King chariots, they're not the worst in the game. They only have 12 models per unit, 12 entities per unit, but still not the most ideal. Those Screaming Skulls are always nice. What is a shame, though, is, of course, with regards to the various major constructs, because you look at this, like, each construct comes from its own individual structure, and, well, let's just put it simply as that. Necrosphinxes and Bone Giants are just better. Hierotitans and War Sphinxes are not bad, but it's like, yeah, you just benefit more from focusing on certain units as opposed to diversifying, which is kind of a shame. And yeah, Ushapti are great. Scorpions, kind of. Though, building a structure, using a building slot just for one unit, and especially when you can get Ushapti with great bows at the same tier, and regular Ushapti, it's just not necessarily the most ideal situation. We can also laugh at the notion of carrion units. Like, yeah, carrion are just like, why would you ever get them in a campaign? So yeah, the way buildings work, and also the way these pyramids work, it's the benefits of these pyramids, some of them are okay, like the Great Pyramid of Settra is okay, but the fact that you do have to spend population surplus as opposed to, you know, getting to tier 4, maybe getting to tier 5, getting those building slots, it's still not a really great situation to be dealing with. So, like, just a building overhaul, research overhaul. But yeah, that inverted difficulty curve that Tomb Kings do have definitely is something that I think Creative Assembly should spend their energy, their efforts, focus their efforts on improving. It should be noted that they have talked and shown revised campaign victory conditions for Legendary Lords, though even then I'm a bit iffy on that whole subject, because for instance, they showed revised campaign victory conditions for Forgrim and what he could have, and what he would have as his short campaign victory condition, and then it's like, get a tier 5 Karazakarak because the landmark that you're required for short campaign victory condition requires you to get tier 5 Karazakarak. That's not the best short campaign victory condition that you could have in the world, especially with the dwarves and you know, their own version of the Undercities in a campaign, the Deeps, which also require population surplus to get going, so, and a building slot, so not ideal to put that kind of victory condition in a campaign. Could have been handled better. So we'll see what Creative Assembly has to offer on the subject. I would be very surprised, however, if they do absolutely nothing for the Tomb Kings. I mean, you do have to consider the Books of Nagash, and you do have to consider the Black Pyramid Nagash, and you do have to consider the role of the Tomb Kings in a Nagash or Undead Endgame Crisis. However, whichever form that's going to take. We'll find out. Costin, signing out.